Hello everyone and welcome back to another album review, and in this video I'm going to review Exister by The Soft Moon. This is the brand new album of the post-punk and darkwave project The Soft Moon, which started with some more standard directions of post-punk with their first albums, but as the years would go by they would experiment much more with their sound, fusing more elements with like industrial music, and as the years would go by their releases would end up becoming more aggressive and more intense, with their prime example being their previous album Criminal, which for me certainly had some of the greatest stuff the band has put out over the years, and I'm basically digging these directions with their more industrial and aggressive sounds. It makes their work sound slightly more refreshing, and it's a direction that I believe works pretty fine with at least some of the songs that they put out. This is also a direction that we saw embodied even further with the solo project of Luis Vazquez, A Body of Errors, which was a full-on industrial album. So Exister basically just goes into some similar directions with what we've heard with the previous albums of The Soft Moon, but the thing is that throughout the years I've never found a single The Soft Moon album yet which I would say that it was something that much exceptional. I'm always to the point where I enjoy their works and I find that there are tracks that are really good, but when it comes to full-length albums they feel slightly inconsistent. It's only with some of their latest works where I can sense The Soft Moon sort of finding their identity and the direction that they wanna go with their sound, but there are still moments that are slightly inconsistent and that don't really manage to work all that greatly in order to make for an album that manages to surpass being good and actually being excellent. And unfortunately I'd say that it's sort of the same case with Exister. This is another album that I managed to enjoy a lot. There are many great elements about this album and we still get those more industrial and intense elements that in my opinion once again they work in a really solid fashion over here. But as a whole thing this is another album that feels kinda inconsistent, and I would possibly say that this is possibly one of the most inconsistent works of The Soft Moon. It doesn't really seem like it knows in which direction it wants to go. In some occasions we're talking about some pretty intense industrial stuff, in other cases we go into some pretty simplistic post-punk directions, and I certainly wouldn't say that this album contains some of the most compelling ideas the project has put out so far. This is one of the least memorable albums, in my opinion, out of The Soft Moon. It starts kinda nice with the track Sad Song, which serves as an introduction, an interlude, and it's a pretty decent ambient moment and kinda prepares you for the whole mood that The Soft Moon have been building up with almost every single one of their albums, going into this really dark and moody aesthetic, which in my opinion it's embraced once again in a really solid fashion over here. Then we have the track Answers, which the more I listen to it the less engaged I feel by it. I'd say that it's a pretty strong note for the album, going instantly to something pretty aggressive and pretty intense, but as an idea it didn't really leave that much of an impression on me. Then we go into a lighter tone with the track Become the Lies, which is actually one of the most straightforward post-punk tracks out of the album, and even if we're talking about one of the least original and least refreshing tracks that The Soft Moon have put out in recent years, it manages to be one of the greatest ideas over here and one of the most memorable tracks. I really enjoy the melodies out of this one, and even if the vocals are not really that much my cup of tea, I believe that overall this is a pretty decent song that is done in a really nice way. Then there's the track Faces Gone, which for me had some interesting ideas. It manages to have some elements that are sort of catchy or having something that feels quite intriguing about them, but the overall execution was not one that was that much to my liking. I believe that there are elements like with the delivery or the instrumentation that could have been handled in a bit of a different way, because at times it feels sort of lackluster or that the melodies don't really fit that well together, but overall it's still a pretty decent moment. It is an okay track. Then we have another teaser track called Monster, which this one goes into a more ambient passage, and it's actually one of the most successful for me for managing to be this pretty dark and melancholic song that is quite slow in its pace, but it actually manages to offer one of the most interesting and most refreshing ideas out of the whole project. So for me Monster sits in a nice position halfway towards this album. The Pit is a track that goes back to the more aggressive elements that we see from The Soft Moon with the recent projects. And while this is a mostly instrumental track that shares many of the intense elements that made Criminal such an appealing record, this is another case of a song where the more I listen to it the less engaged I feel by it. Like I don't know, it's kinda one-dimensional. emotional, it's a bit repetitive, and its more monotone approach just sounds kinda bland. I sort of like the direction towards the end where it gets extremely distorted towards the last seconds, but I don't really know where this is coming from. I can't really say that I see the necessity behind it rather than this just being there. Nada is a pretty okay track that goes into some pretty standard directions of post-punk. Then there's the track Stupid Child, which ended up being one of my favorite moments over here. It is definitely one of the most refreshing moments, being a highly aggressive and highly energetic song with lots of distortion and a tempo that sort of goes into a punk direction, which I find to be pretty interesting. The sounds are kinda haunting and I like the intensity behind the song with the beats and how the synths sound. So for me this ended up being a pretty cool moment. Unfortunately, it is a bit short, it goes only for 1.5 minutes and in my opinion it could have extended a bit longer, but it was one of the tracks that was meant to be perceived as sort of an interlude, but for me it definitely had one of the most refreshing ideas out of the project. Then there's the track Him, which like with Become the Lies, it's one of my favorite moments when it comes to just being a pretty nice melodic post-punk song. And once again, even if the vocals are not really my thing and when it comes to the feature, it sounds kinda off place with this type of song, I still ended up enjoying it and finding it one of the best moments in the album. Then there's the track Unforgiven, which goes into the more industrial directions once again, and for me this wasn't executed all that nicely. It is a kind of one-dimensional song with a feature that in my opinion wasn't really that much complementing the song. While I do recognize what was going for something that sounds a bit different, I don't really see the appeal. For me it was one of the more underwhelming moments out of the project. And then there's the outro Exister, which goes into some pretty similar directions with the intro sad song. It is a nice ambient moment with minimal parts and a few slightly more intense passages here and there as the song progresses, but there is nothing that much more to it. So at the end of the day I find this brand new The Soft Moon album to be pretty enjoyable. It is another album from the group that I find to be pretty good, and it's nice to see them keeping with this consistent streak of putting quality albums. But it's another case where we don't see the project going for something that much more. Instead I'd say that there is a slight deterioration with Exister in comparison to most of the other projects they've put out, which makes me worry that we might not see this consistent streak in the future. Fans of The Soft Moon, especially Criminal, will find enjoyment out of this. I find this to be a pretty solid project, but as a whole thing, it could have been better and less consistent, just like with every single other project The Soft Moon have put out so far. I'm gonna give Exister a 7- out of 10. What's your opinion on this album? Like it, dislike it, why? And what do you want to review next time? Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.